Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Give us just another minute or two to let everybody else come in and get settled. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Give us about another minute and we're going to let everybody else continue joining. All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Information Technology Staff Augmentation Contract Services, also known as ITSAC, vendor debrief for DIR-CPO-TMP-579. We are glad to have you here with us today. Before we get started, let's cover a couple housekeeping items. Just a reminder that you can change your audio by switching between computer and phone. We want to remind everybody that everybody is muted this morning, but if you have questions or if you have something to address with the group, please open your Q&A box and put your questions in there, and we'll take time to answer those at the end. But before we get started, if you would, please raise your hands real quick and let us know that you can hear us pretty clearly this morning so that we have a good audio connection. All right, thank you for that. The speakers that we will have today is going to be Stephanie Harrison, Director of Cooperative Procurement, and Alexis Jimerson, Cooperative Procurement Lead. Going to go ahead and turn it over to Alexis.
Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Alexis Jimerson. I am and was the procurement lead for DIR CPO TMP-579 for ITSAC. On the screen, you will see a listing of the published dates and how we did. These are the dates that we advertised that we were going to either publish or post to the ESBD and the actual dates that those things happened. As you see, our deadline, initial deadline was extended from November 27, 2023 to December 19th, 2023. Our administrative review took place between November 27, 2023 and March 15th, 2024. And our evaluation of responses ran through March till July of this year. And we began the negotiation and contract execution portion of this or phase of this procurement July 26th. And we anticipate it running through October 30th of this year. Next slide. We held a pre-proposal conference as an optional webinar, and we had 466 attendees at that conference on October 4th, 2023. Next slide. For our addenda questions and answers, we had 5 addenda for this procurement. The first addenda was posted on October 4th of 2023 with an administrative edit to the RFO There were non-substantial changes, which included the edit of a header of Exhibit E and F to match the file names in the RFO, and an edit of Section 16 of Exhibit A, which relabeled the exhibit titles to match the applicable file names. Addenda 2, that was posted October 19th, provided question and answers from the pre-proposal webinar that was held on October 4th. And Addenda 3, that was posted November 7th, was just an extension for the response submission deadline from November 27th, 2023 at 2 p.m. Central Standard to December 6th, 2023, 2 p.m. Central Time. We did another Addenda 4 on November 21st that extended the response due date from December 6th of 2023 to December 19th of 2023. On December 4th, we had posted Addenda 5 and provided questions, answers to the questions that were submitted via our Bitstamp portal. We received a total of 303 through Bitstamp, and we also answered an additional 121 questions from the pre-proposal conference. For a total of 424 questions. A lot of those questions were duplicates, and we still provided the answers on from the October 4th pre-proposal conference on 2023. Next slide. The response for ITSAC was the largest response that DIR has to date. We received 433 responses submitted. And we had 91 responses that were attempted and are still listed as in progress. Some of this is how your response may have ended up as in progress, is if you failed to hit the submit button, or a respondent abandoned the response and decided not to respond, or indicated they had no intent to respond. Next slide. After response due date, administrative reviews were completed prior to the start of the evaluation. The administrative review is conducted to ensure that all required documents are present and all forms are signed, and that all materials were received at the time of the submission deadline. After administrative review, hub review is conducted, where your HSP that was submitted is reviewed for completeness, and whether or not it had a good signature, and did you perform your good faith effort to reach out to the hub community. After that review, we have the financial review, and what we check for is, did you provide a DUNS number that correlates with the address that you put into your Exhibit A and into the Bitstamp account that you registered. And we also check to make sure that the respondent scored better than a 9 on the Duns and Bradstreet index. Failure to score better than a 9 on the Duns and Bradstreet index also can cause your response to be set aside or fail admin review. Next slide. The next thing we're going to go over is the evaluation criteria that was used for this solicitation. Responses that were submitted on time for this solicitation were graded their exhibit C, which was the contract marketing plan, and their exhibit B, which is the respondent history and experience, along with your references. The Exhibit B respondent history and experience was weighted at 60% of your overall score, and your Exhibit C contract marketing support plan was weighted at 40%. Next slide. And that the weighting gave you a total percentage of 100. And this is how we calculated scores at the end. The biggest place that most respondents needed to show improvement was the Exhibit C on the contract marketing plan, and we'll go over some of the things that hurt respondents in the next couple of slides. Next slide. Competitive break. After all responses were scored, the DIR determined where our competitive breaks existed. DIR did not, something to note is we did not have a predetermined number of awards. We used a set methodology for determining where the breaks occurred, which was mathematically determined by arranging the scores in order from highest score to lowest and determining the average difference between adjacent respondent scores. There were 2 rounds of scoring, and so those scores were compared and outliers were looked at and reevaluated to verify scoring. Once breaks were determined, DIR determined which breakpoints offered the best value to the state and DIR customers, and an award list was posted. Next slide. Negotiations and contract award. In reviewing responses, DIR analyzed the number and the nature of exceptions. 4 total respondents took exceptions. 4 respondents were in the competitive range. Those 4 respondents were in competitive range. 3 of the respondents withdrew their exceptions, and 1 respondent exceptions are still in review. The negotiations were broken into groups due to the number of awardees. There were 226 awardees that made competitive break, and those were broken into 4 different batches to facilitate increased efficiency on our part and provide the least amount of disruption to DIR customers. Next slide. In this area, we're going to go over the areas of improvement, and we're going to go over Exhibit C contract marketing plan, contract marketing and support plan. DIR scored the answers to these questions in the Exhibit C. Some respondents did not address all questions, and that hurt your score. Some respondents explained how they would recruit talent, but failed to discuss how they would engage with and market to customers, which was a large part of the customer support plan. Some respondents did not address all market segments identified by DIR or identified in their response as that's what they were providing. Some respondents provided sample documents or sales material instead of answering the question asked in the exhibit, and that of course hurt scoring for those individuals. Next slide. In Exhibit B, some of the common issues that we saw, some respondents did not detail their company history and experience well. Some of that included not showing how long your company had been in business, not telling us the projects you worked on, or listing out or letting us know when the project that you worked on was done, which makes it difficult to determine whether it was within the scope of the RFO or not. Some of the respondents did not follow directions regarding having the reference emailed directly to DIR, and they submitted their references with their response, which was not in accordance with the RFO instructions. Some respondents did not receive 3 references, or references were submitted after the submission deadline. Some respondents provided references for their own resources rather than supplying a a customer reference, meaning the respondent turned in their own reference for their own personnel rather than having their client send in the reference for their company's behalf. Some respondents filled out the reference form incompletely or incorrectly, making it difficult to determine whether the reference was in scope with the RFO requirements. And all of these things made it difficult to, or would have hurt your scoring. Those are the areas that were evaluated. Next slide. I now open the floor to questions.
So we have a couple of, to ask your questions, please enter those in the Q&A section of the presentation here. We can't see anything that's in the chat, that's disabled, so you'd have to enter them in Q&A. I'm gonna read out some of these questions. Some of them we're not gonna be able to answer here because they're very specific to your own response. So if you're asking questions that are very specific to your response and you still want an additional debrief, the information that would be shared in addition to this for your actual response would be only your information. Like we can't share other vendors' information or where the other vendors scored. You would be able to see what your score was and where you fell in comparison to anybody else. That's pretty much the additional information that you would get, and you may get some more specifics onto where your proposal did not score high enough, or where you could have improved. But the majority of those that did not make the competitive break fell within some of the categories that Alexis has already gone over. But if you're wanting to see what your actual score was, you need to request an additional debrief with Alexis. Let's see. There was a question about the D&B score of 9. So anybody who has scored above a 9, you did not make it past the financial review. That is considered a higher risk company financially to do business with. And so that's determined by the DIR's accounting department. They complete those reviews and then they give us back a report on which vendors we're allowed to proceed with or not. 8 and below we're allowed to contract with, but 7, if you scored a 7 and 8 on the Duns and Bradstreet at the time of the review, we may have had additional conversations with you all, and we may have opted not to continue with a contract award if you scored and we're eligible above the competitive break. Let's see. There was a question, can we see the breakpoints and how the vendors were evaluated and rated? You can't see each other's scores. That's just not really fair to show everybody's scores. Again, if you're wanting to see your own score, your own actual score and your own break, everything else will be de-identified. You can request a debrief for your company. Let's see. What was the cutoff on the average score? And so we have to do a combination of scoring and numbers. So there were 226 that were invited to negotiations out of 400 plus respondents. So there were a lot of vendors that actually got the exact same score. in the way that the scoring broke out. So the competitive break is determined by kind of what Alexa said. There's a mathematical equation that goes in and actually does a calculation for us based on the scores in an automated system. And it shows where numbers start differentiating between vendors. And this is for anything that's under cooperative co-op solicitation. And we use the same mathematical equation that goes into completes. So when the system comes back and tells us that the first differentiating numbers start at a specific break, that's where our competitive break, where our first consideration is. So it's not necessarily like a specific score, it's a difference in the majority of the scores above versus the majority of the scores below, because again, it's a calculation. And so it's not an exact score break. It's a little bit difficult to understand, but it's a mathematical equation on the back end that helps determine the competitive break. There's a delta 1 and a delta 2, and then those are reviewed by multiple people before that's finalized. If you were to look at it from a whether you got an A, B, C, or a D on a report card, basically vendors with a C+ were invited to negotiations, and everybody below that was not. Let's see. If you did not receive 3 references on behalf of a vendor, is this an automatic disqualification? It's not an automatic disqualification, but you may not have scored, got all the points for that section because that was a solicitation requirement. I'm going to skip that one. Will we get the evaluation score tabulation? Those are not public, so those are not posted. We have the apparent awardee list that was posted on the DIR website. And then once the solicitation closes out, all of the awardees will be posted on the Electronic State Business Daily. In order to get, if you're wanting the actual score tabulation, that is an open records request that you may have to pay to get that, depending on how many pages it is. What is the competitive break? I kind of just explained that on how the competitive break was determined. Were the scored proposals returned to respondents? No, we never return proposals to respondents. It's actually stated in the RFO. How can we determine specifically which items were scored poorly on? So again, if you're wanting your own specific scoring, that is a separate vendor debrief request. It's not a lot more information than what was provided here though. So you're more than welcome to request one. It'll have a little bit more specific information just to your response only. But again, the majority of the vendors that did not score above the competitive break fell within the categories that have already been discussed in this meeting here. Can you provide a list of scores for each vendor? No, that is not public information that we post or that we just provide openly. If you're wanting to see a list of the scores for each vendor, that has to go through the open records request process that you would need to complete. Will this recording be available? If so, where will it be posted? All of the DIR recordings are posted on the DIR YouTube channel. You go to YouTube and look for Department of Information Resources, and there are many videos posted there. Will this PowerPoint be available by email? I do believe the intent is to email that out to the participants of this webinar.
Yes.
Did the respondent perform good faith effort? What does this mean? Are we supposed to reach out to DIR for this good faith effort? So that is an actual Hub question, and we have somebody from Hub on here. I would like them to kind of explain what good faith effort meant.
Tell me the question again, please, Stephanie. It's Teresa.
Okay, it says they're basically asking, what does good faith effort mean?
Okay, the good faith effort is part of the Method B on your Hub subcontracting plan. That's actually outreach to trade organizations and to certified hubs that would be able to provide service for you under your contract under those commodity codes that are listed in association with the solicitation. So that's outreach. I hope that helps. I'm not sure what else to add to that.
That's basically all the question asked is what does good faith effort mean?
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So this particular webinar is for all the vendors that did not get invited to negotiations. So if you're still waiting on contract paperwork to be routed to you, this is for the vendors that did not get invited to negotiations. So this is our high-level debriefs webinar. If you did receive an intent to negotiate notification, you need to correspond with the person that sent that to you. There's a lot of questions in here about seeing the individual company scores. I've already gone over that process.
So Stephanie, I'll say real quickly, everyone that got a no intent to negotiate notice, we followed up our email with a clarification, and in that clarification email was the process that we'd like you to follow to request an individual debrief. Those of you who on the call who have already requested an individual debrief, I will be scheduling those after this webinar. I just wanted to be sure that the people that requested one still wanted one after this call. So there is a process that's already been shared with an email, the email format to use.
Okay, the next question is when can we expect the next ITSAC solicitation from DIR? So those are we're currently on like a 5-year schedule for a new solicitation that can change at any point in time. This is a legislative session coming up. So we're always, as a government agency, at the we have to abide by any legislative changes or mandates. So the current schedule is another 4.5 years from now, would be about the timeline, but again, that can always change. So in order to make sure that you're receiving the notifications, make sure you're registered with the Comptroller's Central Masters Bidders List with the appropriate NIGP codes that your agency provides so that you receive those notifications. Next question is, how do you determine value to the state and taxpayers? I'm assuming you're talking about the best value to the state. There's actually criteria that are listed in the Comptroller's Procurement and Contracting Management Guide that gives tips and tools on what is kind of determined to be best value in the state. A lot of it is determined on customer need. For DIR, because the cooperative contracts are $0 contracts, we're not, and ITSAC are at not to exceed rate, we're not looking at price. So for a lot of solicitations out there, price is one of the best value factors. For DIR, we don't look at price for cooperative contracts as much, because what we're trying to do is fill the customer needs. So we utilize feedback from our customers on what they're looking for, what they need, where their biggest pain points are. So if your response was short on the customer marketing, how you provide the services best back to the customer, you did not score well in the kind of the best value criteria. That's one of the criteria that we look for in a lot of the cooperative contracts is how are you able and how do you plan to support the customers that'll be utilizing these contracts. So that is a big best value determination for the cooperative contracts, and Alexis pointed that out during her presentation. Let's see. This is another hub question, but I'm not actually sure what it means. So whoever submitted this one, you may need to add additional information on it. But the question is, what does, quote, not enough work share for a hub, quote, mean for a hub respondent? Teresa?
Yeah, Stephanie, thanks. I will need more information on that, Rodney. But if you could just let me know exactly what you're talking about, because your hub subcontracting plan is a pass or fail document. It's not scored in your response. So I'm not sure what you mean, if you could give us more information.
Okay. Next question is, may I know competitive score came up? I'm not sure what that question means either. So if you want to provide clarification as to what your question means. ITSAC covered many market segments. The respondents that focus on only one or a few market segments make it through the break, as well as leverage vendors who cover many segments. Alexis?
So yes, if you only had a couple of market segments, you were not penalized. All exhibits were scored on the fullness of your response based on the services that you said you wanted to or could provide. So the short answer is no, there is no difference. We did not differentiate large or small vendors. It was literally how well did you answer the questions and outline what your business does.
Okay. What if D&B, the Duns and Bradstreet, has erroneous data that caused our score to look bad? So it's your responsibility as the vendor to make sure that your records are clean with anybody who's keeping that documentation on you and reporting it to other public entities. The Duns and Bradstreet is one of those. We don't control any of the data that goes in there. That's something that your agency needs to reach out to Duns and Bradstreet and follow their process. I'm not sure what their process is on erroneous data, but they do have processes for companies to follow up with them. But that is something that we also put in our solicitation documentation whenever we posted that we would be checking the Duns and Bradstreet. So you had several months to kind of get that cleared up and fixed before the responses were due. And we did let y'all know that that was going to be evaluated and pass-fail criteria. So again, it's up to the vendors to kind of keep those records updated with the correct data. That the same goes for your Secretary of State filing, same goes for your Texas Comptroller franchise tax filing. In order for us to be able to do business with you, you have to be on basically the lists that allow us to do business with you. And Duns and Bradstreet scores of 9 or higher, we are not allowed to contract with any vendors with those scores. That's part of the process. Exhibit C, contract marketing and customer support plan. Does it need to talk about A through G agencies or just a plan on how we work? Your contract marketing and customer support plan, it's hard to address like very specific questions about that, but in order for somebody to evaluate, so there's a team of evaluators that are looking at that, and they're looking for how you are able to describe that you're going to support and market to the DIR customer base. If you're too general, there's not enough information for them to ensure that you have a very clear plan to actually market and support the DIR customers. If there's no mention, there's no kind of think of it like this is how I tell a lot of vendors. Like if you're going out and you're about to make a major purchase anywhere, but the company that you're working with can't tell you what to do if there's an issue or who to contact or anything like that, you're less likely to go with that company because it's just very general. It's like it's too difficult to figure out. They're not going to it doesn't feel like they're going to be there for you if something breaks or if you have questions. And so you're not going to most likely you're not going to make a purchase from that company or do business with that company, as opposed to the company that gives you the list of all of their support numbers, how to reach them 24/7, how to do this, how to do that. So there's a big difference in proposals that go into the details of how they can actually support the DIR customers. Not everybody that they're doing business with. We're looking very specifically for how do you support, how do you market to DIR customers. And so without that information, you don't score as high on your proposals. Alexis, feel free to add anything there if you want.
No, Stephanie, I think you covered that one.
Of the respondents who have previously been approved for ITSAC, other respondents who have previously been approved for ITSAC, what portion of them were reapproved? And for first time or previously unapproved respondents, what portion passed the competitive break? So out of the respondents who were previously approved, that means, I'm assuming you're talking about those who previously were made the competitive break on another solicitation and were awarded a contract previously on incumbents. And then those who have never had an ITSAC contract under a solicitation, we actually had a pretty big number of brand new to DIR vendors for ITSAC. Alexis probably has those numbers better than I do off the top of her head.
Yes. So out of the incumbents, people, vendors who previously held a ITSAC contract, 92 of them scored above the competitive break, and were awarded a contract under this new RFO. Let me not say re-awarded. The remainder of the 226 awards were all vendors that are brand new to ITSAC and brand new to DIR.
Okay. Is there any other vendor add in the future, or any future supplemental RFP coming in? Okay, I'm not sure on this question, but we do resolicit the DIR cooperative contract procurements on a 4 and 5 year schedule. So we're always rolling out new solicitations. For ITSAC, it's currently not due for another 4.5 years. But again, like I said earlier, that could change. Other respondents who suffered in contract marketing were the issues with the quality of their marketing plan, meaning they have a poor plan for marketing, or primarily it focused on the presentation of their plan. So to answer this for the broad group is a little bit difficult, because again, there were like 200 that fell below 200 something that fell below the competitive break. But again, in general, on the marketing plan, we're looking for the answers to the questions that we posted. Generally speaking, in evaluating and reviewing the responses, the questions actually weren't answered. That tends to be what happens. That tends to be how your response scores lower compared to other responses. Now, I will say that just in general, the responses and the scores were not bad. They weren't low, even those that were below the competitive break, but the volume plays into how many we can award and negotiate with. So since we had over 400 responses, which again was the largest response that DIR has ever had, even vendors who had contracts previously didn't get a contract under this solicitation because there were other vendors or more vendors that scored higher than them. And again, we had a huge group of vendors that all got the same score. So when you have 80, 90 vendors that all get the same score, the way the calculation breaks out the percentage is it starts bumping down other people who are 2 points, 3 points, 4 points below, but the system has to give a break in there. And then there's a delta score 1 and a delta score 2 that show a little bit more numbers in the background. So again, it's the scores. I want y'all to know they weren't low scores for pretty much anybody who responded to the solicitation. It was just highly competitive, very, very competitive on this one. And we anticipate that this will continue to be a trend with DIR cooperative contracts, because that has been the trend for about the past 4 or 5 years, that we get more and more and more responses to each solicitation. And a lot of what we see is vendors who have had contracts just kind of submit the same thing over and over without going through and reading it, or there's a lot of copy and paste from other responses. And you can tell whenever the response isn't customized to the information that's being asked. You can tell whenever it's just marketing materials that were plopped in there and there's actually no thought put into the response or the questions that we're asking for, and it shows in the scoring. Let's see. For the reference, can you share more on reference that are good fit for DIR? So we asked very specifically for references on the types of services that you're proposing in the response. So there's a very specific instructions on the reference forms that we're looking for other customers that you've provided the same types of services to that you're proposing in the solicitation response. What role the pricing played in the selection? If the price, okay, so the ITSAC was a not to exceed rate, so price wasn't a part of the selection. Everybody had the same pricing. We didn't allow y'all to propose pricing, so there was no pricing submitted with this one, so it wasn't a part of any of the selection. It wasn't evaluated. It wasn't considered. I've already answered that one. How much of the vendor performance report was considered for best value to the state? So the vendor performance report is not necessarily a best value criteria, so to speak. It's a kind of a pass-fail thing. So on the vendor performance, we are not allowed by statute to negotiate, to enter into contracts with anybody who basically has a failing grade. You're barred from doing business, so we're required to check it and make sure you're not on a barred list for that. So it's not necessarily that it's considered a best value criteria. It is one that we look at, and if you have a lower score in the vendor performance tracking, it may be one that we need to address with. But again, you got to remember, these are highly, highly, highly competitive. So any issue, whether it is a Duns and Bradstreet number, you submitted exceptions, you have a lower vendor performance tracking score, those all play into whether or not you're considered a vendor that we want to move forward with for a contract. What was that, Alexis?
No, I was just gonna say that all plays into whether or not they're considered best value to the state.
Right. If a respondent is an existing ITSAC service provider, does this have an impact on the scoring criteria? No.
No.
Does ITSAC have an open enrollment clause where new suppliers could be added during an existing contract's term? Ours is, oh, sorry, I can't read here. Or is our only next chance to be added to ITSAC when it's recompeted in 4-ish years. So we don't have a provider enrollment system for ITSAC. We're not statutorily allowed to do provider enrollment. Again, however, it is a legislative year coming up that could change, but currently DIR doesn't have the statutory authority to do provider enrollment. As far as ITSAC, so ITSAC are services. You as a vendor have the ability to go and work business to business with other vendors. If that vendor wants to subcontract with you on their contract, they would have to go through the process to add you to their prime contract as a subcontractor. That is up to that vendor, and that would be a contractual agreement between business to business and not a DIR contract. So that is one way that vendors can become a part of an ITSAC contract without having a prime contract, but you have to negotiate and work those deals out with vendors that have a prime contract under DIR. That was our last question.
Okay.
Alexis.
I will, if there are no further questions at this time, we will go ahead and conclude the webinar. I thank you all for attending. I thank you all for your interest in doing business with DIR, and we do encourage you to continue to look for open solicitations that may fit the services that your businesses provide. And have a great day.